Deliverance sleeps. Once its skies thundered with the sound of dropships and orbital foundries, the pulse of the Raven Guard beating like a black heart above the void. Now the skies are empty. The forges are quiet. The great spires of the moon world rise like monuments to ghosts. In the darkness, only the wind moves, slow and hollow, whispering through broken steel. The sons of Corvus Corax still walk these halls, but they move like phantoms through their own home. The surface of Deliverance bears the marks of war long past. Burned soil, collapsed bunkers, silent vox towers that once carried the Primarch's voice. His words are gone now. Only echoes remain. The Raven Guard does not speak of him, not aloud, not anymore, but in their silence his name lingers. A weight, a promise, a question that has never been answered. They say he vanished into the warp 10,000 years ago on a day when the stars themselves seemed to dim. He left Deliverance with a single message, that he would return when the galaxy needed him most. Then he was gone, not killed, not destroyed, simply gone. And yet, in the stillness of their fortress monastery, they feel him, the shadow that never left. The librarians sense it first, a faint presence that brushes their thoughts like a feather through smoke. The tech marines hear it in the rhythm of cooling metal. The chaplains dream of wings unfurling across a blood-red sky. Some dismiss it as superstition, others call it faith, but deep down they all know the Raven Lord is not dead. He is waiting. Deliverance itself seems to breathe with the memory of him. The city below, the sprawl of broken factories and dark manufactoria, remains draped in the twilight of its low orbit. Here the people whisper prayers to the Emperor, but when the lights fail and the blackouts come, as they always do, they whisper another name as well. Corax, the Shadow, the Redeemer, the Lord of Deliverance. They tell their children stories, that when the night grows too long, the Raven will return to guide the lost, that his wings will blot out the stars above the traitors, that his vengeance will be quiet and his mercy colder than the void. The Imperium has long forgotten such stories, but on Deliverance, memory is a form of resistance. In the grand hall of the fortress, a statue stands beneath layers of dust. It shows Corvus Corax as he once was, tall, gaunt, beautiful in his melancholy. His armor sculpted like obsidian feathers, his eyes turned downward in sorrow. In his hands he holds nothing. Once it was said the sculptor left them empty on purpose, to remind all who looked upon him that the Raven Lord never grasped for power, only for redemption. Every century the chapter cleans the hall and renews the oath, to serve the Emperor, to honor the Primarch, and to wait for the day of his return. They no longer speak the words aloud. They simply bow their heads and feel the silence settle like dust upon their armor. For silence has always been the language of the Raven Guard. They learned it from their father, a Primarch born not in light but in shadow. Corax never shouted his victories to the stars. He whispered them. He moved unseen, struck with precision, vanished before his enemies could scream. To his brothers he was an enigma. To his sons he was a god. To the Imperium he was a reminder that even angels can weep. And now, 10,000 years later, the weeping continues. The galaxy has grown crueler. The Imperium that Corax once fought to protect has become a cage of fire and faith. The Emperor sits upon his golden throne, silent and unseeing. Chaos festers in every corner of the stars. The Raven Guard fights still, quietly, efficiently, unseen, but every battle feels the same. A whisper against a storm, a shadow against a sun that no longer shines. And somewhere in the warp, something stirs. The librarians of Deliverance wake in the middle of the night, sweat freezing on their skin. They dream of black feathers falling through the void. They hear a heartbeat echoing through the immaterium. Slow, deliberate, patient. They feel wings stretch across their minds, vast and heavy, stirring the shadows that have slept too long. At first, they say nothing. Fear and reverence are twins in the minds of the faithful. But when the dreams continue, they bring their visions to the reclusiarch. He listens in silence, then nods. "Do not fear," he says. "The shadow of our Father protects us still." The chaplains begin to record the dreams, writing them into the Codex Deliverantum, a living scripture of prophecy. Over time, the entries grow darker, more vivid. The raven watches from the storm. The raven walks between worlds. The raven returns to the place where light is forbidden. To outsiders, these are omens, nothing more. But to those who remember the old stories, the true stories, they are proof. Proof that the promise was not broken. Proof that Corvus Corax still lives. Some among the chapter have begun to prepare. Small rituals, quiet prayers, adjustments to the rites of battle. They speak of cleansing deliverance, of rebuilding its faith, of readying the world for their Father's shadow. Others caution restraint, that such talk borders on heresy, that the Imperium does not tolerate resurrection. But even the cautious ones feel it. The shifting of fate, the tremor in the warp, the faint flutter of wings above the void. If you stand upon the broken balcony of the old spire and gaze out toward the horizon, you might see it too. Just for a moment. A flicker of movement, a suggestion of form like something vast and black passing between the stars. Then it's gone, leaving only the wind and the slow hum of the planet's core. The silence of deliverance is not empty. It is waiting. Every night the stars above seem to dim just slightly more, as if the universe itself is holding its breath. Somewhere far away, deep within the labyrinth of the warp, a pair of black wings unfold. Shadows ripple. The storm shifts. The Raven Lord stirs. And on deliverance, his sons wake in unison, their eyes turned skyward. They feel something ancient move within their blood. The old purpose, the old hunger. The silence that once haunted them now feels alive, resonant, almost musical. It is the sound of return. Before he was the Raven Lord, before he was the shadow in the Emperor's light, Corvus Corax was a child of chains. He was not found upon a throne of gold or a cradle of prophecy. He was found beneath the earth, in the cold dark of a prison world named Lycaeus, later to become Deliverance. The people there did not know the stars. They knew only the echo of machinery and the taste of dust. For generations they had toiled for masters they could not see, building weapons for a war they would never fight. It was into this darkness that the infant Primarch fell, carried by the storm that scattered his brothers across the galaxy. His arrival went unnoticed by the overseers above. He was found by miners, pale, starving men and women who lived their whole lives in tunnels. They named him Corvus, after the black birds that gathered near the vents of the mines, though they had not seen the sky in years. From the beginning he was different. His eyes caught the faintest light in the dark. He moved without sound. The air around him felt heavy with thought. He grew quickly, too quickly, but the people of Lycaeus did not question it. To them he was a gift, a symbol of hope, the boy who walked in shadow, who spoke softly but made the strong tremble. He learned of cruelty early. He saw men beaten for resting, women dragged away for speaking out. He watched as the overseers' ships descended from the spire above, bringing fresh punishments for those who failed their quotas. Corax never forgot their faces, all of the cold eyes of authority, the smile of ownership. In that darkness, hatred was born, not as rage but as resolve. He began to organize, quietly at first. Whisper to whisper, shadow to shadow. He taught the miners to move unseen, to strike without warning, to turn their tools into weapons. He led them not as a tyrant, but as one of their own. When the uprising came, it was not a shout but a breath, a sudden sweeping silence. The guards vanished into the tunnels, and when they were found again, they were already dead. When the rebellion reached the surface, Corax led the charge. The spire fell in flames, the chains melted, the overseers hanged from their own cranes. Lycaeus was free, and for the first time in its long history, its people saw the stars. Corax stood upon the summit of the ruined spire, watching the sky with quiet awe. He did not yet know his name in the Emperor's tongue. He did not know he was one of 20. But in that moment he felt destiny move like wings above him. He was not made to rule, he was made to free. It was then that the Emperor came. He descended upon Lycaeus in a vessel of golden light, flanked by the custodes, his armor radiant, his eyes like molten suns. The people fell to their knees, but Corax did not. He watched this god walk among the ashes of his rebellion, and he felt no fear, only curiosity. The Emperor approached him and spoke his name, Corvus Corax. The sound of it was strange, as if he were reminding the world of something it had already forgotten. The Emperor saw what he had made, a Primarch shaped by oppression, by the quiet dignity of suffering, by the will to liberate rather than to rule. In Corax, he saw the possibility of a purer empire, one not built on obedience but on freedom. He offered him a place among his sons, and Corax accepted without kneeling. The Emperor did not mind. He smiled, perhaps the only time he ever truly smiled at one of his children. Together they rebuilt Lycaeus. The forges that once served tyrants now built ships for the Great Crusade. The chains were reforged into banners. The miners became soldiers. Lycaeus was renamed Deliverance, a promise written into its very soil. The Emperor gave Corax command of the 19th Legion, a force already known for stealth and precision. Under his guidance, they became something else entirely. A legion of ghosts, masters of infiltration and sabotage. They struck unseen, vanished without trace, and left only silence in their wake. Corax taught them that mercy was not weakness, that victory without conscience was another kind of slavery. His sons followed him not because of fear, but because they believed in him, because he reminded them of what it meant to be human. His brothers respected him, though few understood him. Horus called him the Silent One. Fulgrim admired his precision, though not his austerity. Leman Russ mistrusted him, for the wolf could not see the raven's purpose. Only Ferrus Manus and Vulcan seemed to grasp the purity of his intent. Yet even among them, Corax was apart. He did not crave glory or dominion. He lingered at the edges of councils, speaking only when needed. His eyes were always on the horizon, as if he already knew that all this light would someday fade. There were moments when he stood alone on the hull of his flagship, watching the stars blur into lines of light as the fleet entered the warp. He would think of deliverance, of the tunnels, the rebellion, the faces of the freed. He carried their ghosts with him into every battle. In those years, the Raven Lord was not yet broken. He was a symbol of what the Imperium might have been: liberation through strength, unity without tyranny. But shadows grow longer when the light burns brightest. Whispers began to follow him, that he was too soft, too human, that his compassion was weakness, that his silence hid doubt. Some even said that his loyalty was divided, that he served his people more than his emperor. Corax ignored them as ravens ignore the barking of hounds. But deep within, he wondered, could the Imperium built on blood and iron ever be the one he dreamed of? Could the Emperor's vision truly free mankind, or merely bind it under a different chain? He never spoke those doubts aloud, but the warp listens even when gods do not. And so it began on the slow unraveling of a noble soul, the shadow within the shadow. For even a creature born of darkness cannot live forever without being consumed by it. They called them the shadow of the Imperium. Where other legions descended in thunder, the Raven Guard came in whispers. where the sons of Rus howled and the sons of Dorn built fortresses of iron. Corax's warriors moved like thought, unseen, unheard, inevitable. They fought not for glory but for precision. To the Raven Guard, a clean victory was one that left no trace of their presence at all. Their Primarch taught them that war should be silent, that the truest victory was not the destruction of an enemy, but the ending of a chain. The early years of the Great Crusade were full of light. The Emperor's sons fanned out across the stars, reuniting lost human worlds beneath the banner of Terra. The Raven Guard fought with quiet brilliance, their campaigns swift, surgical, and strangely merciful compared to their brothers. They struck only where it mattered, severing command chains, silencing fortresses, freeing slave populations. Entire planetary regimes fell without a single bombardment. To the conquered, they were saviors. To the War Master's Council, they were a necessary mystery. Corax never marched with fanfare. His fleet did not display trophies or banners. When the other Primarchs sent heralds ahead to announce their arrival, Corax's emissaries came as prisoners, freed slaves, and former enemies. They spoke of justice, not conquest. To some, this made him a hero. To others, a heretic. Lorgar of the Word-Bearers once said, "You seek to free mankind, brother." But what is freedom without worship? Corax had replied quietly, "Freedom." He walked away before Lorgar could respond. The Emperor saw in Corax something he could not easily define. Compassion sharpened into a weapon. It made the 19th Legion indispensable and at the same time deeply unsettling. They did not fight to prove their devotion. They fought to make tyranny impossible. Their armor was black as the void, their emblem silver as moonlight. They spoke little, but their silence was eloquent. Entire campaigns were written into the histories of the Crusade with a single line: compliance achieved. No survivors. But those words were misleading. The survivors were always there, just not counted. They were the freed, the unshackled, the reborn. Worlds liberated from the yoke of despots found themselves under a new order, one that demanded loyalty, but not worship. Corax often left behind no garrisons, no governors, no altars. He believed that freedom should be earned, not enforced. This philosophy made him dangerous. At the conclave of Nicaea, when the Emperor forbade the use of psychic powers among the legions, Corax spoke only once. Knowledge does not corrupt, but the fear of it does. His words earned him glares from the more devout Primarchs, and a rare nod of approval from Magnus the Red. Horus, ever the diplomat, laughed afterward. "Our silent brother speaks only to cause storms." Corax replied, "Storms cleanse." For all his distance, there was affection among his sons. The Raven Guard adored their father with a loyalty born not of fear but of respect. They would walk into fire for him, not because he ordered them to, but because he believed they could. And when he fought beside them, he was terrible and beautiful. On the battlefield, Corax was a ghost. He appeared where the enemy least expected, wings of black metal unfurling behind him, his talons cutting through armor as though through air. He did not roar, nor did he curse. He moved like inevitability, a figure of judgment, never rage. In those moments, even his enemies felt awe. There are records recovered from traitor Vox logs, voices trembling as they described a figure descending from the smoke. The shadow of light, the angel of silence. But Corax's perfection carried a flaw. He was too human. He grieved for every loss, even among his foes. After each battle, he walked among the dead, imperial and alien alike, and whispered words that none but the wind could hear. His sons learned never to disturb him then. He bore their sorrow so they could continue fighting. Ferrus Manus once called him the conscience of the Imperium, and perhaps he was. But even conscience has a breaking point. As the Great Crusade stretched on, the Emperor grew colder. His sons saw less of him. His orders came through others, through bureaucracy and ritual. The light that had guided them began to feel distant. When the Raven Guard were sent to pacify the Kirafex cluster, a network of worlds enslaved by their own technocrats, Corax began to question. The Emperor's command was clear: annihilation, no mercy, total compliance. But when Corax looked upon those worlds, he saw not heresy but fear. People begging for deliverance, not punishment. He defied the order. He spared the innocent, broke the ruling caste, and rebuilt the system in the Emperor's name, but by his own hand. It was the first time he altered the script of conquest. The victory was total. The silence from Terra was deafening. He began to understand that his father's empire was not built on freedom but on order, not liberation but control. Still, he obeyed, because he believed, perhaps foolishly, that obedience was the price of peace. The Raven Guard continued to fight. They fought in shadow and silence, never questioning the Emperor aloud. But inside, a slow fracture grew, a quiet, invisible fault line that would one day split the Legion's heart. Among his sons, whispers began to form, that their father was different, that he saw the Emperor not as a god, but as a man who could be wrong. And in that whisper lay the seed of every tragedy to come. For when the heresy finally came, when the sons of the Emperor turned their blades against one another, Corax would learn that silence is not always strength, and mercy not always enough to save what you love. The shadow that had once protected him would become his cage, and from that cage there would be no return. Only exile and the long, dark path to atonement. War came not as thunder, but as betrayal. When the call to Istvan V came, the Raven Guard answered without hesitation. Corax believed, as all loyal sons did, that they were marching to end rebellion, to cleanse the galaxy of treachery before it consumed everything the Emperor had built. He did not yet know that the knives were already waiting, not in the hands of enemies, but in those of his brothers. The memory of Istvan is carved into the soul of the Legion. No words can soften it. No silence can erase it. The Raven Guard landed alongside the Iron Hands and the Salamanders, 3 loyal legions sent to strike the traitors who had already declared against the throne. Horus, Fulgrim, Mortarion, and the others waited upon the black sands with banners raised, their voices smooth and convincing. The Loyalists advanced, the traitors feigned retreat, and then the sky opened. The second wave descended. The Night Lords, the Iron Warriors, the Word-Bearers, and the Alpha Legion, the very legions that had sworn brotherhood hours before. The betrayal was absolute. The air filled with fire. Orbital bombardments scoured the plain, tearing loyalists apart by the tens of thousands. Corax's forces were encircled before they could form ranks. The sands melted to glass beneath the fury of orbital fire. In the chaos, Corax fought like a specter of vengeance. His wings burned, his armor torn, his blades slick with the blood of those he had once called kin. He shouted for his brothers, for Ferris, for Vulcan. There was no answer. He found Ferris Manus first, or what was left of him. The Iron Hand lay broken, decapitated, the silver of his flesh gleaming like metal beneath a sunless sky. Fulgrim's laughter echoed across the Vox, a sound that would haunt Corax until the end of his days. He found Vulcan's banner shattered in the dust, his sons fighting to the last. He saw the Salamander's lines break, the Iron Hands burn to ash. The Raven Guard tried to hold, disciplined, unyielding, their tactics perfect. But even perfection dies beneath betrayal. Corax called for evacuation, but the skies were filled with enemy ships. His fleet above was crippled, its Vox channels jammed by Alpha Legion mimicry. Every command he gave was intercepted, twisted, or silenced. The shadows that had always served him now belonged to the enemy. For the first time, Corax felt powerless. He rallied what forces he could, carving a path through the ruins. His sons fought beside him, falling one by one, their black armor glowing with reflected flame. They moved through the storm like ravens through smoke, wings broken, hearts burning. When rescue finally came, it was too late for most. The loyal remnants, a handful of 1,000 Astartes, escaped through the dying fire, pulled from orbit by the shattered remnants of their fleet. They watched Istvan fall away beneath them, a black scar upon the stars. Corax said nothing for 3 days. He sat in the silent bridge of his flagship, staring at the void. When his captains approached, he raised a hand, not in command but in mourning. He had lost everything: his brothers, his faith, his legion. When he finally spoke, his voice was a whisper. "Deliverance!" He ordered the fleet home. The Raven Guard that returned to Deliverance were not the same. They were hollow-eyed, haunted, moving like ghosts through the halls that had once echoed with purpose. The forges were lit again, but their light felt wrong, pale and cold. Corax walked among his sons, his presence heavy, his silence heavier. He offered no speeches, no vengeance, no comfort. He gathered his captains in the grand hall and said only this: "The Emperor gave us freedom. We must now learn what it costs." He began to rebuild, not out of hope, but necessity. But how does one rebuild when half a legion lies buried on a poisoned world, when the forges cannot keep pace with despair? Corax sought a way. He spent sleepless nights in the archives beneath Deliverance, surrounded by data crypts and relics of the Great Crusade. It was there in the ancient vaults that he found the Primarch's folly, the gene tech of the Emperor himself, the secrets of creation. He should have turned away. He did not. Driven by desperation, he began experiments to restore his legion. The surviving apothecaries assisted, their hands trembling as they handled relics they barely understood. With the aid of Mechanicus adepts, Corax attempted to accelerate the growth of new Astartes using the Emperor's genetic blueprints. For a time, it worked. Warriors began to rise again, faster, stronger, more disciplined than ever before. Deliverance sang with the hum of creation. Corax believed he had found redemption. But the warp has a way of twisting even pure intent. The first failures came quietly. A recruit whose eyes turned black as glass. Another whose limbs grew longer than they should have. One who spoke in screams. Then came more. Warriors whose bodies warped beneath the strain of perfection, whose minds fractured into violence. The new soldiers were powerful, yes, but monstrous. Their faces stretched, their bones fused with armor, their wings of flesh and metal unfurling like blasphemous parodies of their Primarch. They called them raptors, and Corax called them his sin. He tried to lead them, to control them, to redeem what he had made. For a time they obeyed. They fought beside their brothers, their claws tearing through traitor lines, their shrieks echoing through the void. But soon the mutations worsened. The raptors turned feral, attacking friend and foe alike. Corax realized too late what he had done. In his grief, he returned to the Emperor's vaults and begged for forgiveness. He prayed to a god who would not answer. He cried out into the silence, demanding a sign, any sign, that redemption was still possible. And from the darkness came only stillness. Then at last, a single voice. Calm. Distant, not the Emperor's. "You know what must be done." When dawn rose over Deliverance, Corax ordered the raptors gathered. He watched them kneel before him, their deformed faces raised in faith. He walked among them, touching each on the brow. One by one, he granted them mercy. Swift and final. The screams echoed through the spires for hours. When it was done, he stood alone, his armor dark with blood, his wings folded like a shroud. He said nothing. He did not weep. He simply walked to the edge of the platform and looked toward the stars. To his sons, he left only a message. "I go to seek forgiveness in the only place it may yet be found." Then Corvus Corax, the liberator, the shadowed sun, entered his ship and vanished into the warp. And so Deliverance fell silent once more. But this time the silence was not mourning, it was waiting. For the Raven Lord's exile had begun, and the galaxy would tremble at what would one day emerge from that darkness. When Corax left Deliverance, the stars were fading. His ship rose from the moon's shadow without ceremony, without escort, without sound. The surviving captain stood on the fortress balcony and watched in silence. None dared speak, none dared stop him. They knew what this meant. The Primarch of the 19th Legion was not going to war. He was going to judgment. The vessel vanished into the void, swallowed by the warp. The Raven Lord was alone. For days there was nothing. The hum of the engines, the faint flicker of warning lights, the pulse of the ship like a slow heartbeat. Corax sat in the dark of the command sanctum, surrounded by the shadows that had always been his companions. His armor was still stained from Deliverance, the blood of his own sons dried to black. He did not clean it. He did not sleep. He whispered only once, not to the Emperor, not to the gods, but to the void itself. "If I am to be judged, let it be now," the warp answered. The stars around him stretched, then shattered. Reality tore like paper. The ship's walls twisted into shapes that should not exist, angles that folded inward, reflections of reflections. The air grew heavy with whispers, familiar voices, though none living. He heard his sons, the dead of Istvan, the raptors he had slain. Their words were soft, forgiving, cruel. "Father, why did you leave us? Father, come back. Father, till we forgive you, Father, and we hate you." Corax stood, his wings unfurling with a metallic sigh. "You are not my sons," the whispers laughed. The warp was not a place, but a thought, and Corax had entered it burdened with too many of his own. Every doubt, every regret, every unspoken prayer echoed back at him through the storm. He felt himself split between the man he was and the shadow that had always followed him. For centuries, the Raven Lord had fought to master the darkness within him. Here, that darkness took shape. It appeared first as a reflection in the glass. His own figure, blacker than void, its eyes like dying suns. Then it stepped forward. It smiled with his mouth. It spoke with his voice. "I am what you made me," the shadow said. "You sought to free men from tyranny, and in doing so you built one of your own. You played at godhood and called it love. You created monsters to ease your guilt and called it redemption. I am all of it, Corax. I am your failure made flesh." Corax drew his claws. "Then I will end you." The shadow laughed. "You can't kill what you are." They fought, though not with blades. Their struggle was made of memory and thought, of sin and sorrow. Every blow Corax struck landed upon himself. Every wound he gave was one he had carried for years. The warp fed on it, thickening, deepening, folding reality into ruin. He saw Deliverance burning. He saw his brothers laughing as Istvan fell. He saw the Emperor silent upon his throne, unmoving as his children died. And through it all, the shadow whispered, "You think yourself free because you fight for freedom, but you are a slave to your own guilt." Corax fell to his knees, his wings trembled. He closed his eyes. "Yes," he whispered, "but at least I know my chains." In that moment something changed. The darkness recoiled, the whispers faltered, the storm around him grew still. For the first time, Corax did not fight the shadow, and he accepted it. He rose slowly, his armor glowing faintly with pale light. The shadow's smile faded. "What are you doing?" it asked. "I am taking you with me." The two forms, light and dark, flesh and echo, merged. Not destroyed, not purified, but reconciled. The warp shuddered. The whispers became a single voice. Corax felt every sin, every failure, every act of mercy and cruelty fuse into one. He felt whole again, not holy, not absolved, but entire. Then he was falling, through worlds of madness, through time that had no direction. through visions that clawed at the edge of sanity. He saw his brothers, Horus burning, Sanguinius dying, the Emperor falling in silence. He saw the Imperium decaying into faith and flame. He saw his own name fade from memory, his statues crumble, his sons forgotten. He fell for what could have been moments or millennia. When he awoke, the ship was gone. The void was quiet. He stood upon something solid, a surface made of nothing, a plane of thought. Above him stretched a sky of black feathers, infinite and shifting. Something stirred within that darkness, vast, watching. Not a god, not the Emperor, something older, something that remembered the shape of mercy before mankind forgot it. Corax felt its gaze upon him, and for the first time since Istvan, he felt peace. The being spoke not in words, but in meaning. You have walked the path of freedom until it led to solitude. You sought absolution and found only yourself. What will you do now, child of shadow? Corax bowed his head. I will make amends. The being seemed to smile, or perhaps it was the illusion of one. Then go, and be what you are. Wings unfolded behind him, vast, endless, no longer made of steel but of darkness itself. He rose into the void, his form dissolving into smoke and memory. The warp screamed and something within it fled. When the Raven Guard's astropaths next opened their minds to the Imperium, they felt a pulse ripple through the storm. A tremor like wings beating once, twice, then gone. For months afterward, the shadows on Deliverance seemed deeper, more alive. Some swore they saw a figure move within them. Tall, winged, silent. The chaplains called it a miracle. The librarians called it warning. But those who truly understood whispered another word: return. Corax was no longer lost. He had become what the warp feared most, a being of both shadow and purpose, a soul that the gods could not corrupt because it no longer denied its own darkness. He was no longer merely the Raven Lord. He was the shadow made whole, the echo of guilt given grace, and he was coming back. There are no records of how long Corvus Corax wandered the warp. No chronometer could mark the time within that sea of madness, where seconds stretch into centuries and moments collapse into nothing. But among the Raven Guard there is an unspoken belief that he never truly left, that somewhere between the real and the unreal, the Raven Lord learned to make the storm his home. He had gone into the Imperium seeking punishment. What he found was revelation. The warp is a mirror, one that shows not truth but possibility. Most who look into it are devoured by what they see, their fears, their guilt, their desires made monstrous. But Corax had already faced himself. There was nothing left for the warp to twist. He moved through its tides like smoke through wind, unseen by demons, untouched by madness. He felt them around him, vast shapes, entities of thought and hunger, the dark gods who had claimed his brothers. They whispered to him, offered him power, vengeance, even forgiveness. He answered each the same way. Your forgiveness means nothing to me. When they reached for him, he became mist. When they hunted him, he became shadow. When they mocked him with the laughter of Horus and Fulgrim and Lorgar, he became silence. The Raven Lord learned what it truly meant to be unseen. The warp could not hold him. It could only reflect him. And so the reflection changed. Those who can read the Imperium, navigators, psychers, astropaths, began to notice it first. A new phenomenon, faint but constant. A distortion moving through the currents like a vast shape gliding beneath dark waters. It had wings. It made no sound. And wherever it passed, demons screamed and dissolved into nothing. They called it the Shadow of Deliverance. The Ordo Malleus took notice. Reports came from across the Segmentum Obscurus. Chaos warbands found slaughtered to the last man. Their warp beasts turned to ash, their ships drifting empty. Witnesses, unbroken, trembling, spoke of a presence that fell upon them from the dark. Not fire, not fury, but the absence of both. A silence that killed. The Inquisition dismissed it as superstition. The Raven Guard did not. To them, the signs were unmistakable. Their father's hand was moving again, not in light but in shadow, cutting through corruption as he once cut through tyranny. And yet he was no longer as he had been. If the warp could have shape, it would have been his. If guilt could become weapon, it would have taken his form. Corax's body was changing. His wings were no longer mechanical, but extensions of himself. Living shadow given purpose. His voice, once quiet, now carried through the Imperium as a thought rather than a sound. His presence filled the space around him with stillness, a calm so deep that even demons hesitated to approach. In this new existence, he came to understand something profound, that darkness was not evil in itself. It was potential. It was the place where creation waited, unformed. It was the silence before the first word, the pause between heartbeats, the shadow of mercy. The Emperor had forged him to be the weapon of freedom. The warp had remade him into something older, the balance that freedom required. He no longer saw chaos as power or the Emperor as God. He saw them both as echoes of the same flaw. Will without understanding, creation without compassion. And in that realization, he found purpose. He began to hunt, not in hatred. Hatred was fire, and fire burns. He hunted in silence with precision, as he always had. He struck at the servants of the warp who preyed upon the lost, the forgotten, the weak. He stalked demon princes through dream realms and tore their essence apart. He whispered to broken souls adrift in madness, showing them the way back to light. Every act of vengeance became an act of healing. Every shadow he passed through became sanctuary for those who still resisted corruption. And so his legend grew. In the Imperium, priests began to whisper of the Black Angel, a figure seen in the dreams of dying soldiers, a winged silhouette who offered no words, only peace. On Chaos worlds, cults spoke of the Silent Reaper whose coming meant extinction. Among the Xenos there were no words, only the quiet disappearance of entire fleets into the void. Corax had become myth, a god the Imperium could never canonize and Chaos could never claim. And yet, he was still searching. Through the endless currents of the warp, he sought something, or someone that called to him through the noise, a light faint and familiar buried beneath millennia of silence. Sometimes he thought he saw it, a shape upon a golden throne flickering at the heart of eternity. Sometimes he thought he heard a voice. Not the Emperor's command, but his sorrow. And in those moments the Raven Lord would pause, wings folding, eyes lowered. "Not yet," he would whisper. "Not until I have earned the right to return." The warp trembled around him when he spoke. Even the demons listened. He no longer walked as man or Primarch. He walked as consequence. And in the darkness between stars, where the light of the Astronomicon could not reach, Corvus Corax began to shape something new. Not empire, not rebellion, but balance. When he emerged again into real space, no one knew where he came from. The sensors of a dozen Imperial ships recorded only anomalies, impossible shadows, flickers of light where none should exist. And on the worlds that burned with heresy, the fires went out. There in the ashes, the survivors swore they saw him. Black wings stretched wide, pale eyes watching, his voice a whisper that carried through the dust. "Be free." Then he was gone. The warp could not hold him. The Imperium could not see him, but both could feel him. The shape of something vast moving in the dark, a memory too strong to die. The Raven Lord had returned not as a son seeking his father, but as the shadow that even gods must cast. And somewhere, deep within the silence of the Imperium, a single feather drifted down, black, endless, and burning softly with light. It began as a whisper. At first, no one believed it. There had been whispers before. Every century or two, a rumor, a sighting, a miracle whispered from one soldier to another before being swallowed by the endless noise of the Imperium. But this time was different. This time the whisper lingered. It passed from ship to ship, hive to hive, chapel to chapel, until it became something more. A hum beneath reality, a quiet vibration that made even the most faithless pause and listen. The Raven Lord was returning. No one could say how the first report reached the Ordo Malleus. A nameless astropath on a dying world broadcast a psychic scream before her mind burned away. The Shadow Walks. On another world, a Chaos Warband disappeared mid-ritual. Their shrines found cold, their corpses folded into neat lines as if laid to rest by an unseen hand. In the dark between stars, a Mechanicus exploration fleet recorded static that, when decoded, formed a single phrase repeated in Low Gothic. Deliverance remembers. The Imperium dismissed it as coincidence. The Inquisition called it heresy. But the Raven Guard listened. They were fighting in the Eastern Fringe when the first true sign appeared. A traitor fleet of the Word-Bearers had cornered the remnants of the 10th Company on the broken world of Cerberoth. For 6 days, the Loyalists fought in silence, outnumbered and surrounded. On the 7th day, the enemy Vox went dead. When the relief force arrived, there were no bodies, only black feathers drifting through the smoke. The Raven Guard fell to their knees. They did not need to see him to know. Word spread like blood through water. Across Segmentum Tempestus, cults began to appear, not of chaos, but of memory. Men and women who painted their faces in ash and whispered prayers to the shadow that saved the innocent. They spoke of a winged figure who appeared where all hope was lost, who moved without sound, who fought without mercy. Some claimed he spoke to them in dreams, others said he never spoke at all. The ecclesiarchy condemned the stories as blasphemy. The Ordo Hereticus sent purges, but every executioner who entered those cult temples returned changed, if they returned at all. One of them, an inquisitor named Elena Grast, left behind a fragment of testimony before her death. He is not demon, he is not angel, he is something in between, a truth made flesh. When he looked at me, I remembered what mercy felt like. It terrified me, the warp itself seemed to shiver in his wake. On the demon world of Utherax, a blood-soaked moon where the Night Lords worshiped their long-dead Primarch as a god of terror. The screams suddenly stopped. The skies, which had burned crimson for centuries, turned black. When the Grey Knights arrived weeks later, they found the entire moon cleansed. No life, no corruption, only quiet. In the center of what had been the main citadel stood a single phrase carved into stone. I am the shadow you made. No mortal hand could have written it. Even the Adeptus Custodes took note. From the edge of the Sol system, they reported disturbances. Faint warp echoes that passed close to Terra and then vanished, leaving behind an aftertaste of calm as if the storm itself had bowed its head in silence. Whispers grew louder. Some claimed to have seen him, a black-winged figure on a shattered moon standing atop a mountain of ash, a flash of feathers seen in the void between battleships. A voice like thunder wrapped in stillness saying, "You are not forgotten." The Raven Guard of Deliverance began to prepare. They reforged their relics. They reawakened the old halls. In the deepest vault beneath their fortress monastery, they cleaned the statue of their father for the first time in a millennium. The dust fell away, revealing eyes carved so lifelike they seemed ready to open. The chapter master, Kayvon Shrike, knelt before it and whispered, "We are ready." Some nights later, the shadows in the hall began to move. They shifted not by torchlight or by wind, but by will. The air grew still. The sound of footsteps echoed light and distant. The sentries at the gates swore they saw a figure standing beneath the great arch, tall, lean, wings spread wide like a storm of midnight. They dropped their weapons. None dared approach. When the figure lifted its head, its eyes were not human, not glowing, not cold, but deep, reflecting light rather than casting it. A voice like memory itself filled the hall. Deliverance endures, and then he was gone, leaving only feathers and silence. The following day, the Raven Guard received a transmission, not by vox, but by thought. Every member of the chapter heard it at once. It was not a command. It was not a prophecy. It was a promise. I am with you. That was the moment the Imperium truly began to change. Reports of the Raven Lord's intervention multiplied. Chaos strongholds fell without siege. Renegade warlords vanished from their ships. In the warp, psychic storms died abruptly, leaving calm seas of silence where once there was madness. But the strangest thing was this. No one could remember the details. They would recall being saved, seeing shadows, hearing wings, and then nothing. Memory itself folded around the events, leaving only peace where terror had been. The scholars of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica called it an anomaly. The priests called it miracle. The Raven Guard called it homecoming. And somewhere beyond the edges of recorded space, in the deep dark where the light of the Astronomicon fades to nothing, Corvus Corax watched. He saw what his Imperium had become. A tomb lit by faith, a machine fueled by obedience. He saw the Emperor's light flicker and felt for the first time in 10,000 years a spark of anger. But he did not return in fury. He returned in patience. He knew the cycle could not be broken with violence. It would break with silence, with example, not destruction. His war was not to end the Imperium, but to remind it what freedom once meant. In the quiet spaces between battles, he moved unseen, guiding, protecting, correcting. Sometimes a fleet would survive because a reactor never failed. Sometimes a world would resist chaos because its dreams turned clear. Sometimes a single warrior would hear a voice in the dark, not commanding, not promising, only saying, "You know what must be done." To the Imperium, he became legend. To the warp, he became dread. To his sons, he was faith made real. And to the galaxy, he was balance, the shadow that endures when all light has burned away. There are those who say that Corvus Corax was the Emperor's reflection. That where the master of mankind cast light, Corax was the shape it made behind him. And if that is true, then what happens to the shadow when the light begins to die? The Imperium burns. 10,000 years after the heresy, the golden light of Terra has dimmed into a feverish glow, a fire that consumes as much as it protects. The Emperor's radiance, the Astronomicon, no longer feels like a beacon of hope, but a demand. It calls for obedience, not understanding. It burns through the minds of psychers, feeds on their lives, keeps the Imperium moving forward, but at a terrible cost. And somewhere beyond the reach of that dying light, Corvus Corax watches. He remembers what it once was. The dream of a united humanity built not on fear but on purpose. He remembers his father's voice, calm and distant, filled with visions of a dawn that never came. He remembers the silence that followed and the throne that has not spoken since. The Emperor's silence had always been the loudest sound in the galaxy. Corax understood it in ways his brothers never did. He had lived in silence all his life. He knew that silence could be peace, but it could also be punishment. In his exile, as he wandered the warp, he had come to see the Emperor not as a god, nor even as a father, but as something else entirely, an idea that had outlived the man who created it, an idea of perfection, of control. But control, Corax now knew, is just another word for fear. He moved unseen through the sectors near Terra, through the dark zones that the Administratum had long abandoned. There the Imperium's light was weakest, and its cruelty strongest. Worlds once compliant had become prisons of faith, where priests ruled by decree and the people starved in the emperor's name. Corax did not bring armies. He brought silence. One by one, the worst of those worlds fell quiet. The priests vanished. The banners burned, not in rebellion, but in stillness. No records show who struck first, only that one morning the people of those worlds awoke free. Their overseers were gone, their shackles broken. Some called it a miracle, others called it blasphemy. The ecclesiarchy declared it the work of chaos. The Inquisition sent kill teams. None returned, and in the deep halls of the imperial palace the whispers reached even the custodes. The emperor's angels, silent and eternal, gathered before the golden throne, and one among them spoke. "My lord," he said softly, his voice shaking with reverence, "your shadow walks again." The figure upon the throne did not stir. But somewhere within the labyrinth of psychic flame that surrounded the emperor's dying consciousness, a flicker passed. A single thought, faint as a heartbeat. Corax, the emperor's shadow, his failure, his son. Perhaps for the briefest instant, the emperor remembered the boy who had looked up at him on the day of their first meeting. Defiant, unbroken, full of compassion. The only son who had not bowed. Perhaps he remembered why he had loved him. Corax moved closer to Terra, unseen even by the most vigilant eyes of the Imperium. He stood upon the edge of the Sol system, cloaked in the dust and ruin of forgotten stations, and he looked upon the light of the throne. It pulsed across the void, bright, endless, consuming. He watched it and he wept. Not for his father, not even for his brothers. He wept for what the dream had become. Once the emperor had sought to free mankind from the tyranny of superstition. Now his name was the greatest superstition of all. Once the Imperium had been a promise of progress. Now it was a machine that devoured its own. Once the emperor's sons had been angels of reason. Now they were ghosts and monsters, myths and warnings. And Corax had become the shadow of them all. He no longer sought redemption, he sought balance. He would not destroy the Imperium, he would not save it, he would correct it. The Raven Lord began to move again, quietly, precisely. He infiltrated the forgotten systems of the Segmentum Solar, where ancient data vaults still hummed with the echoes of the Great Crusade. He walked through the ruins of old Manufactoria, the bones of titans lying like broken gods beneath the dust. He found the old sigils of the Mechanicum, the codes that once served his father's design, and reawakened them. Machine spirits bowed to him, recognizing the trace of the Emperor's gene code in his blood. He whispered to them, not in command, but in understanding, and they obeyed. In the span of a year, unregistered fleets began to move, small, silent vessels bearing no heraldry. They carried food, medicine, supplies, things the Imperium no longer bothered to send to its forgotten worlds. They appeared where famine reigned, delivered aid, and vanished again. No one knew who commanded them. But on their hulls, painted in black, was the mark of a single feather. On the world of Thessala Prime, when a planetary governor asked a dying man who had saved them, the man replied with his last breath, "The shadow of the Emperor." And so the myth grew. To some, Corvus Corax was a saint, to others a heretic, to the Inquisition a threat beyond measure. But none of that mattered to him. He no longer sought recognition. His work was quiet, invisible, like the beating of wings in the dark. He was the Emperor's unspoken will, not the tyrant's decree, but the Father's compassion that the Imperium had forgotten. In this, he had become something greater than the Raven Lord. He was now the Emperor's shadow in truth, the part of his vision that the light had burned away. In the warp, the Chaos Gods began to notice. They felt their influence falter where his wings passed, their power wane in the calm he left behind. They called out to him, offering alliance, vengeance, ascension. He answered only once, "You cannot corrupt what no longer desires power." And with those words, whole swaths of the Imperium fell silent. The Raven Lord had become something new, not man, not demon, not God. He was the space between, the calm in the storm, the silence that both light and darkness require to exist. On Deliverance, his sons began to dream again. They saw him standing beside the Emperor's throne, not as servant or rebel, but as equal, the shadow that keeps the flame from blinding itself. And though none dared speak it aloud, every Raven Guard knew their father had not returned to wage war. He had returned to remind the galaxy that mercy still existed, even in the dark. Every age of mankind carries its own prophecy. Some are carved in stone, others whispered in prayer, others still written in blood. And in the 41st millennium, the age of endless war and faith without sight, prophecy is the only thing that still gives shape to hope. Among the thousands that circulate through the Imperium, none is so quiet, so forbidden, or so persistent as the one that speaks of the Raven's return. No one knows its origin. Some say it came from the librarians of Deliverance, who claim to have dreamed the same vision 1,000 times across 1,000 years. Others whisper it was first recorded in the forbidden vaults of Terra, in a sealed archive that predates the Horus heresy itself. The Mechanicus claim they found fragments of it hidden within the code echoes of the Astronomican's psychic frequency, a message pulsing beneath the Emperor's light. Whatever its source, it spread like mist. Subtle, invisible, impossible to contain. The prophecy says this: when the stars grow blind and the throne no longer burns, when angels forget their wings and gods forget their names, the Raven shall rise from the storm, to weigh the hearts of the living and the dead. The ecclesiarchy denounces it as heresy. The Inquisition hunts those who speak it. But every purge only seems to make it spread further, whispered in the dark corners of ships, in the catacombs of hive worlds, and in the prayers of those who still dream of mercy. For the prophecy promises something no other myth of the Imperium dares to offer. Not salvation, not victory, but justice. And justice is a dangerous thing. The prophecy has many interpretations. Some believe it speaks of Corvus Corax returning at the end of all things, when the Emperor finally dies and the galaxy burns in his absence. Others believe he already walks among mankind. A silent judge, unseen but ever present, guiding fate in ways too subtle for mortals to perceive. Among the Raven Guard, there is a different belief. They do not see the prophecy as a promise of return, but as a reminder that their father never left. To them, the Raven Rising is not an event but a state of being. The moment when a man or a legion or even a world remembers what it means to stand in the shadow of freedom. Yet there are signs. On the world of Cinerax, an entire regiment of the Astra Militarum claimed to see a winged figure descending from the smoke, standing between them and a tide of demons. The figure spoke only once: "Fight for those who cannot," and then vanished. When the Inquisition arrived, the survivors refused to recant. The regiment was executed, but the story lived on. On the forge moon of Vir, a Magos biologist analyzing ancient gene data discovered a pattern in the ether. A voice encoded within the subatomic harmonics of Corvus Corax's own genetic seed. When played through Vox resonance, it formed a phrase in High Gothic: "I return where silence falls." The Mechanicus purged the record within an hour, and on Deliverance, in the deepest vault beneath the chapter's fortress, the statue of the Primarch has begun to change. At first it was dust, faint black particles gathering around the base. Then over weeks the wings darkened as though ink bled through the marble. Now in the faint light of the cathedral it almost seems to move. Not with motion, but with presence. The Reclusiarchs refuse to explain it. The chaplains pray before it in silence. The youngest Raven Guard touch the stone and swear it feels warm. And sometimes when the storms of the warp reach their peak, when Deliverance itself shakes under the psychic pressure of distant wars, a voice echoes through the halls. Soft, gentle, familiar. Do not fear the dark. You were born of it. The prophecy of return spreads further. In the hive worlds, the oppressed whisper the raven's name before uprising. In the guard, soldiers carve a single feather into their armor before battle. In the temples of the ecclesiarchy, heretics leave black candles burning, praying not for deliverance from the emperor but from his silence. Even within the upper ranks of the Imperium, the prophecy finds believers. Among the inquisitors, there are those who secretly call themselves the Silent Order, men and women who operate outside the ecclesiarchy's control, guided by a single creed, that the Imperium's survival requires balance, not faith. They wear no insignia, no badges, no robes, only a black feather pinned beneath their cloaks. Their records speak of a voice that guides them in dreams, a voice that does not command but reminds, a voice that says, "Serve humanity, not the machine that consumes it." In the archives of the Ordo Malleus, a sealed report lies forgotten. Its author, a gray knight named Daon Var, claims that during a battle in the Eye of Terror, he glimpsed a being made of shadow and light, tall, winged, serene. It destroyed a demon prince with a touch. When he knelt, it whispered, "You are not my enemy." He wrote in his final line, "If this is the heretic they fear, then I no longer understand what loyalty means." The Imperium buries these records. The ecclesiarchy burns the whispers. But the prophecy endures, because deep down, even the most hardened servant of the throne knows the emperor's silence cannot last forever. And when the time comes for that silence to end, when the light of the Astronomicon flickers for the last time, something will step from the void. Not a god, not a demon, a shadow. And in that shadow, mankind will be measured. The galaxy turns beneath the dying light of the Astronomicon. The stars burn low, their brilliance devoured by distance and time. Whole sectors are swallowed by the warp. The songs of faith grow louder as the silence between them deepens. It is an age of endings, an empire circling its own grave, praying that if it cannot live, it may at least endure. And somewhere beyond that horizon, a single shadow moves. It is older than fear and quieter than hope. It has watched empires rise and fall, watched faith turn to madness, watched love become law and law become chains. It remembers the first moment of light and the cost that came after. It remembers deliverance. The Raven Lord walks again, not as a man of flesh, nor as a god of vengeance, but as the embodiment of what the Imperium has forgotten. He moves through the dark between stars, unbound by the laws of time and reason. He moves as the conscience of mankind itself, unseen, unheard, undeniable. To the Imperium, he is a myth. To chaos, he is poison. To his sons, he is home. On the edges of the Segmentum Obscurus, the Raven Guard fight a desperate war against the corruption that has seeped into every world. They are outnumbered, undersupplied, abandoned by the greater Imperium. But they fight still because they remember him. One night, or what passes for night beneath the dying suns, they see a shadow move across the sky. No fleet, no weapon, just darkness itself sliding over the battlefield. The demons begin to scream. The captains report it later, though none can describe what they truly saw. Some say it was wings stretching wider than the horizon. Others say it was a man walking through the storm. One, a chaplain who had never known fear, wrote in his journal before dying, "He was everything we hoped he would be and nothing we deserved." The battle ends in silence. The demons are gone. The corruption fades, and when the Raven Guard search the ground, they find only a single feather, black as the void, faintly warm to the touch. They keep it in the reclusium of deliverance. It never gathers dust. The Raven Lord moves where light cannot go. He walks among ruins and forgotten worlds, the last witness to an age of faith without meaning. He does not seek glory, for glory is the language of fools. He seeks understanding. Sometimes he appears as a man, cloaked, tall, eyes like shadowed glass. Sometimes he is no more than a voice in the dreams of the dying. And sometimes, when the warp grows too loud, when the demons rise and scream at the edge of reason, he takes his true form. Wings unfurled, silence absolute. He does not fight as he once did. He does not need to. Where he passes, corruption unravels, warp light flickers, the storm stills. It is said that he carries no weapon now, only a memory of what one cost. His vengeance is no longer wrath. It is understanding sharpened into judgment. He sees the Imperium for what it has become. A cage gilded with faith, rotting beneath the weight of its own survival. He sees priests preaching obedience while children starve. He sees Astartes turned into relics of forgotten wars, fighting for a god who cannot hear them. And still, he does not hate it. He simply mourns it. Because Corvus Corax understands something his brothers never did. That even the brightest light must cast a shadow, and that the shadow's purpose is not to destroy the light, but to protect it from itself. He walks now in that space between destruction and redemption, between emperor and man, between memory and myth. In the warp, the chaos gods watch him. They whisper of him with unease, for he is something they cannot unmake, a soul that has accepted both its sin and its sanctity. They call him the uncorrupted. Some even fear that his very presence wounds them, that where he stands their hunger is stilled. In the halls of the Inquisition, his name is struck from every record. Yet in their private moments, some inquisitors pray to him before they sleep. They whisper, "Let me judge as you do in silence." And among the common people, the farmers, the miners, the forgotten masses of the Imperium, his legend grows. They paint his wings on the walls of ruined churches. They burn black candles before his image. They say that if you speak his name in the dark, the night grows a little quieter. They do not call him a Primarch. They call him what he became, the Raven's shadow. There is a story told on Deliverance, passed only from chaplain to chaplain, never written, never recorded. It says that one night, beneath a sky without stars, the Reclusiarch himself felt a presence in the great hall. He turned, and there, before the statue of Corvus Corax, stood a man, tall, lean, wrapped in shadow. He did not glow. He did not speak. He simply placed a hand upon the stone, and for a moment the hall filled with light. Not bright, not blinding, but gentle. The kind of light that finds its way through cracks in walls, through broken glass, through hearts long sealed against hope. Then the man turned and began to walk away. The Reclusiarch fell to his knees. "My lord," he whispered, "is it truly you?" The figure paused. The shadow flickered like wings. "I am what remains," came the reply. "But that is enough," and then he was gone. The Reclusiarch told no one. But in the years that followed, the chapter began to change. They fought not only to survive, but to heal. They built not only fortresses, but sanctuaries. And when they spoke of the Emperor, it was not as a god, but as a father who had lost his way. And of the son who walked the long road to find him again. In the endless dark, the Emperor still sits upon his throne, silent as the grave he sustains. But somewhere deep within that labyrinth of dying stars, a presence moves, faint, patient, familiar. And perhaps, just perhaps, the Emperor feels it, a shadow touching his light, not to consume it, but to remind it. That mercy was once strength, that silence was once wisdom, that freedom was once love. And if he could still dream, he might dream this, a world reborn not in fire but in calm. A sky darkened not by despair but by wings, and a figure standing in the twilight between worlds, watching as the first new dawn breaks across the galaxy. Corvus Corax, the Raven Lord, the son who forgave when all others could not, the shadow that endures. And when the Emperor wakes, the raven will already be waiting. And so, the shadow fades. The story of Corvus Corax is not one of victory or defeat. It is the story of endurance, of quiet strength, of the space between despair and redemption where meaning still breathes. He was never the loudest of his brothers nor the brightest, but when all their lights went out, his silence remained. A reminder that mercy is not weakness, that freedom, even in the darkest age, is still worth whispering about. If you listen carefully, you might still hear him. A faint sound between heartbeats, between stars, between thoughts. The rustle of wings where none should be. The comfort that comes just before sleep. Thank you for walking in the shadow tonight. If this story brought you peace, if it helped you rest even for a moment, let me know below. Tell me what the raven means to you. Until next time, dream of the dark between the stars, and remember, the silence is not empty. It's waiting.